Hi, thank you for tuning in into our podcast. How's your day going? This podcast will be discussing and looking into the cultural differences of three Indigenous groups, specifically the Algonquin, Métis, and Nunavik, which is also the Inuit group. Some specific aspects we will be looking at for each group are modern or traditional governance structure, artistic expression, and the traditional way of life. First, we will be looking at the Algonquins' modern or traditional governance structure. They are patrilineal, which means they follow the male line of descent. They lived in clans and they had animal totems such as cranes, wolves, bears, loons to symbolize the clans. The elders and clan chiefs served as the community's egalitarian leaders and were very respected. It was forbidden for clan members to marry someone of different ethnic, religious, or social group. The Algonquins' relationships with other indigenous groups were mostly determined by the circumstances in the area, and creating familial relationships generally served to ease relations between neighboring populations. Next, we will have the Métis Nation's modern or traditional governance structure. They have democratically elective governments that serve as the Métis Nation's representatives. The Métis have been self-governing since the 1700s, and they have created a democratic community government. They have smaller units that functioned independently and autonomously until an outside threat or mission required the deployment of a large group. The Métis laws of the hunt and the Voyager boat brigade regulations were some of the first Métis oral and custom laws, and the assembly service serves as the fundamental means of communication for the fiercely autonomous Métis people. And here are the Nunavik's modern or traditional governance structure. They were fighting for self-governance for a very long time. In 2002, formal quote, self-government negotiations with the Canadian government and the province of Quebec started. In December 5th, 2007 in Quebec City, the province of Quebec, the Inuit of Quebec, and the federal government signed an agreement to principle to formally establish a new regional administration in Nunavik. In Nunavik, they established this new regional administration. And this new regional administration will represent all Nunavik residents as a public government rather than an ethnically specific one. So all Nunavik residents will be represented by this new regional administration, not based on ethnicity. Now on to artistic expression. The Algonquins were renowned for artistic expression in weaving, carving, beading, and quill work. These traditional artistic forms are used for both practical and ceremonial purposes, and they often have symbolic connotations. The double curve motif, which is a symmetrical arrangement of two opposing spirals or curves inspired by plant forms, is a well-known design of the Mi'kmaq, but those in the Algonquin area made it highly elaborate. The Métis were traditionally skilled storytellers, string players, dancers, and creators of floral embroidery and beadwork. Since the 1870s, Métis authors have gained notoriety for criticizing racism and colonization that have shaped Métis identity and peoplehood. Métis poets explore their experiences as Indigenous people through vivid poetry, and the Métis have historically written and performed songs on their experiences as a new nation. Plus, Métis filmmakers have been working since the early 90s. Now, a common characteristic to the Nunavik style is that they are realistic, but that varies across different communities, like how some sculptures are an exception, as they frequently have an idealized, surreal character, and it frequently feature physiological aberrations. Numerous Nunavik artists discuss the importance of truth, syllogic, and their art is used to document adventures and to portray commonplace activities such as people going hunting and nursing babies, and etc. Now, on to the last aspect we will be looking at, their traditional way of life. The Algonquin nations were mostly independent from each other. They hunted, traded, and inhabited vast areas of the eastern woodlands and subarctic regions. Some lived in the southernmost regions where soils and climate allowed agriculture. But they were formerly semi-nomadic hunters and gatherers who traveled tremendous distances in boats made of birch bark. However, most were too far north to make agriculture a viable choice, so they were not farmers and depended on hunting and trapping and gained a notoriety for their mastery in them. Different bands would group together at good fishing spots during the summer, and it was also a socialization period. But as winter approaches, they would once more split off into tiny hunting groups, called bands, made up of members of their extended families in order to improve their chances of surviving the hostile environment. They also exchanged oral history to preserve their way of life in wigwams, which are made of birch bark readily disassembled. Métis families and communities have historically moved across the land in accordance with the cycles of ripening and reproducing flora and fauna, which required them to adjust their way of life to the passing of the seasons. The Métis have to be adaptable in order to collaborate effectively during prosperous times and function autonomously during lean times, since opportunities and the cultivation of garden crops or agriculture also depend on the seasonal cycle, and the gathering of resources is also influenced by the weather. The following of the seasonal cycles as a lifestyle is still present among Métis who lead traditional lives today. Last but not least, the Nunavik. In what is now Quebec, the ancient Nunavik have been living nomadic lives for almost 4,000 years. They occupied an area of about 500,000 square kilometers, which was more than a third of Quebec. And traditional hunting and fishing are essential sources of food for them. Since the area is not connected by any roadways, and the Nunavik is not connected to the southern part of Quebec, all year long, the communities relied on air transportation. That's all I have. If you are interested, I have more podcasts on the beautiful world of contemporary Indigenous studies. I hope you all enjoyed this.